More than 70% of men who killed their current or former female partners had already had at least 2 interactions with police, the legal system or child protection. This is according to analysis of a decade's worth of sentencing comments from judges.
The researchers also found that nearly 1 in 5 of the perpetrators was on bail or parole when they committed the crime. Joining us now is the study's lead author, Professor Kate Fitz-Gibbon from Monash University. Kate, thanks so much for your time this morning. Take us through how you conducted this analysis.
So through this study we looked at 235 cases of men who had been convicted of killing their female intimate partner in an Australian court. So the cases come from all Australian states and territories with the exception of Queensland and were sentenced over a decade. And what we were really interested to understand was where in the case prior to the act of killing were potential points of intervention. Where could we be doing better to prevent these killings from occurring?
And what did these comments tell you about the perpetrators?
Yeah, so the comments provide a lot of insights into who men are who kill their female intimate partners, and absolutely critically for prevention, where we could be working better at different points of the system to effectively intervene and to prevent these cases from occurring. We found that in over 70% of cases, the perpetrator had at least 2 interactions with a point of the justice system, be it police, the courts, child protection, prior to the act of killing. So this should give us hope. It's frustrating, but it should give us hope that with improved decision making, improved risk identification, assessment and management of these men's risks, that we could prevent these killings from occurring.
Also interestingly, many of the convicted offenders had experienced family violence themselves. 1/3 experienced intergenerational violence. Just over half of the offenders had a history of alcohol misuse. There was a history of drug abuse and also a history of mental illness as well.
Yeah, these are really important findings because what they show us is that we need to be working as a whole of system within and beyond the justice system if we are going to effectively intervene earlier and prevent these cases. With the finding around intergenerational violence, this is an area that has received relatively little attention, and what we need to be doing is ensuring that for children and young people that experience violence, that there are the child-centred, age-appropriate supports to support their crisis and safety needs, but then critically to support their recovery and healing.
These findings really are an indictment on our system and the system's failure to protect women. How can this data and this analysis help to reduce the high rates of women who are being killed by men?
Yeah, it's been a horrific first 6 months to 2024 in terms of women's lives lost to men's violence, and we know that in the decade over which these cases have been looked at, that many states and territories have been on a significant reform journey. What this really shows us is that we have to continue that we need to ensure that we're not tinkering at one point of the system, that we're building a comprehensive whole of system response that intervenes early to prevent men's violence against women, because the violence is preventable, but we need to have the resources and the system responses in place to do so.
And in trying to reduce the number of women who are killed by men, some experts have questioned the approach on the education of all men about gender equality. And while of course the education of everyone about gender equality is a positive thing, does this data suggest that perhaps a more targeted approach would produce better results?
Look, this data certainly shows us that there are high-risk offenders and high-risk perpetrators that have significant histories of violence, not only towards their female intimate partner, but also violent convictions towards others in the community as well. So there is that high-risk cohort of offenders. But we also know that even though it's certainly not all men in the Australian community can be part of the desperate change that we need to address and ultimately prevent violence against women, whether that's calling out disrespectful behaviour amongst their family, friends, work colleagues, whether it's being part of addressing it and ultimately changing the conversation. There's multiple roles that everybody can play.
There's also talk in the Monash report securing women's lives, where advocates are calling on a greater focus on perpetrators and their history, rather than the focus solely being on the victims and survivors.
Yeah, this is really important because we know that for far too long we have relied upon victims to keep themselves safe, and that we collect significantly more information about victims and victimisation, which is such a critical piece of the puzzle in terms of keeping individuals safe. But we need to ensure that we're also understanding the core of the problem, and the core of this problem is men's violence against women. So we need to be building our understandings of what perpetrators and perpetration looks like, so we can have the most effective responses, early intervention initiatives, and ultimately prevention. That's what we all want to see, preventing this violence from occurring.
Professor Kate Fitz-Gibbon from Monash University, we really appreciate your time this morning. Some important findings. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And if this story has raised any issues for you, you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline. That's 1800 RESPECT, which is 1800 737 732.